Good morning, good afternoon, good evening if you're following these keynotes and general sessions out there on the World Wide Web. Pete Malcolm is up next from Abiquo, and there's a little story that you may have noticed about Pete Malcolm and Abiquo themselves. Platinum Plus sponsors of huge cloud computing shows don't usually ask you not to mention their name to anyone, but he did for weeks on end. Please don't say who the stealth sponsor of Cloud Computing Expo, the 5th Cloud Computing Expo, is. So we didn't. And 2 weeks ago, we did, and since then I've seen more press coverage and more commentary and more dissecting of what Abiquo's offering is. So it's obviously quite a canny move. So if you're launching a startup, you might want to consider that and be a stealth sponsor. Let's give it up for the CEO of Abiquo, Pete Malcolm. They are yours, sir.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon. So are we both wearing ties because we're Brits? Or is it because I'm selling something? One of the two. So, there it is down there. Great. So this afternoon I want to talk to you about Abiquo's vision of what we call Virtualization 2, or a term that you'll hear us use, the resource cloud, which we think maybe describes things a little easier than maybe you've been used to. But first of all, I want to start with looking at what some of the issues in virtualization are today. You pressed his clicker and nothing happened. Oh, there it is. Back one. There we go. So the first issue that we see a lot of discussion about is virtual machine sprawl. The IT infrastructure organization is having a real difficulty with the sheer volume of virtual machines that are being created and in managing those. In the old physical world, it was a lot easier. You know, you knew where you point to that box over there and that's where it is and you can go and do it. It's really difficult to do that when you've got a huge number of virtual machines. So virtualization sprawl is a big deal. The second issue that I think that we've recognized is that the IT infrastructure team and the people responsible for those virtualized servers from an applications perspective are very disconnected. They really have completely different interests, and that manifests itself in a bunch of different ways, not least when a particular virtual application has been finished with. It often stays there because there's no incentive on the people using the application to actually do anything about it. So you've got an awful lot of virtual machines out there which are actually doing nothing. We've got a very high effort in provisioning new machines, and that means that organizations lose their agility, the ability to do what-if scenarios, short-term projects, all that kind of stuff goes away because it takes too long to get your machine provisioned by the IT organization. Poor capacity planning and utilization, kind of the benefits that virtualization promised of we're going to get those machines all loaded up more and utilized a lot more, we're going to be able to plan the capacity and all that kind of stuff, doesn't really happen. There's still a huge proportion of physical machines out there which have very little actually running on them, and they cost a lot of money. They cost a lot of power, they cost a lot of cooling, all of that kind of stuff. Security and compliance is a really big issue. Certainly security, if you start to look outside your own data center, security is a giant issue, as I think everybody recognizes. But you've got a lot of risk and associated compliance problems inside the organization as well. I mean, take the classic example of an investment banking organization. They've got to keep the research analysts and the investment bankers, they've got to keep their stuff separate. That's a lot harder to do in a virtualized environment, unless you want to lose all your flexibility. And lastly, and the thing that we're really concerned about in this presentation today, vendor lock-in is a really big problem for a number of the people we speak to. You've got a very high initial purchase cost, and really high maintenance costs. And that is, we think, is artificially inflating the pricing because of the lock-in. So I want to talk to you about this vision slide, which you see all over the place. But let me try and explain what we mean by this and what our vision is. I'm not talking product now, I'm talking about strategy. This is how Abiquo sees the future of virtualization, virtualization 2.0, if you like, we see, firstly, a complete separation between the physical infrastructure and the provision of physical infrastructure, whether that comes from your own internal resources or is provided by somebody else. We see a separation from that, from the virtual world. And you can see it on this diagram here. We've got the physical infrastructure around the outside, the actual servers, the storage, the networking, all that stuff. And then that may be provided, as I said, might be from your local data centers you've got, might be from remote data centers, might be from hosting providers, might be from infrastructure as a service providers. They are all contributing resource into this resource cloud. And then on the inside of that cloud, but completely separate logically, you've got the consumers of that resource cloud, the people who are actually using those resources, the people managing virtual enterprises and data centers and all that kind of stuff. And we see those virtual enterprises as being autonomous. So what happens is, instead of the IT infrastructure organization actually provisioning machines and doing all that kind of stuff, they delegate that to the virtual data center. And think about why that doesn't happen today. It doesn't happen because the IT organization has to keep its arms around all the physical and virtual machines, because you can't provision virtual machines easily without having access to the physical machines. I don't necessarily mean physical access, but I mean access to the machines. And if you're doing that, you can screw up what is already there. You can also use up more resource than you should and take other things down in that way. So what we see is the virtual enterprises being created by, and a virtual enterprise is a logical unit, being created by the IT infrastructure organization, and someone is appointed as the enterprise admin, or several people are appointed as the enterprise admin of that virtual enterprise. And they are then able to go and do the provisioning of virtual machines and indeed create subunits, virtual data centers in this example, create subunits themselves and have other people manage those. So you've got a tiered level of delegation. But they operate within strict resource limits. So when the IT infrastructure organization provisions a new virtual enterprise, it says who's going to administer it and what the resource limits are going to be. And today in resource limits we think in terms of CPU cores, we think in terms of memory, we think in terms of disk storage, those sorts of things. So you set limits for each virtual enterprise. And once you've done that, the virtual enterprises can go do their thing. They can provision machines, they can appoint other people who can provision machines, full role-based management of all that stuff. Now, when it comes to actually deploying the virtual machines, that's taken care of automatically. So the virtual data center just says, I want to provision a machine or an appliance, a collection of machines. I want to provision that. And the decision as to where that machine actually gets deployed in the physical world is decided according to a workload policy. And the workload policy considers a whole bunch of different things when it does that, starting with the obvious, like can that physical machine, does it have the right hypervisor to run the virtual image that I'm talking about, really basic stuff, through to policy decisions about what that data is, who can see it, whether it should be in the enterprise, out of the enterprise, whether there are compliance issues, security issues that should dictate that the stuff in this rack over here belongs to investment banking and the stuff in that rack over there belongs to research, and you may not mix the two, those sorts of issues, all determined by workload policy. And the other thing that workload policy determines is things like load balancing. Now, I'll give you two examples of load balancing. If you're thinking of this as a large enterprise, you may say, I want to have a policy that we spread our virtual machines across all the available physical infrastructure, certainly the internal stuff we've got, in order to maximize the performance of every application. Now, if you're a hosting provider, you probably want to do exactly the opposite to that. You want to load up one machine completely before you move on to the next machine. You want all your machines running at full capacity. So different examples of workload policy, and that dictates how those virtual machines are actually distributed amongst the physical infrastructure. And the managers or the administrators of the virtual data centers and virtual enterprises neither know nor care where their application is actually running. As long as it's been done in accordance with policy, and yeah, sure, they may be able to state preferences, but they don't actually know where their machine actually ends up, and they don't need to know. So the physical infrastructure is delivered by the IT infrastructure organization, and it's consumed by the virtual data centers. And so IT is now, the IT organization, infrastructure organization, is now contributing to service levels. Got to provide service levels, resources that meet these service levels. They can plan for capacity and all those sorts of things. They can see what's going on. They can buy additional resource from a hosting provider or an infrastructure as a service provider and add it in. So it's not the sort of public-private cloud model. We think it's much more fluid than that. Elasticity will be much more fluid, and we won't in the future talk quite so much about public and private clouds as we do now. It'll just be one, what we've called the resource cloud. Now, lastly, in the center there of that diagram, you've got the image libraries, and we think image libraries are a key part of this. You need to be able to deploy virtual machines very rapidly, or indeed virtual appliances, which are a collection of virtual machines, very rapidly. And we've got 3 tiers of libraries there. You may have a private library, which just belongs to a particular data center, contains images just for that data center. You may have a shared library where, for example, your IT infrastructure organization has placed a series of images. So here's, for example, is the corporate standard, Windows 2008 server with the antivirus. We need a standard, and the other tools, management tools that we have a standard on any server. And those are easily and immediately deployable by the virtual enterprises. And going right up to the top layer there, public image libraries, where vendors can make their images available for immediate deployment. And, provided you trust the vendor and you trust the image that's there and all that kind of stuff, then those may be made available to you too. Again, all within the control. Every user in the system is all role-based and permission-based as to what they can do and what is available to them, or all dictated by the central policy. But within that, they can manage their own infrastructure, manage their own deployments of virtual machines. So that's the core. Let's look at what the 3 foundations of that are. Separation, complete separation between the physical infrastructure and the virtual enterprises, the application side of it. Delegated authority, so that you spread the load, which is currently all taken by the IT organization. You spread it, or the infrastructure organization, you spread it among the various groups, and thereby massively distributing the load. And third corner of this is the allocation, where virtual machine images are automatically allocated according to policy against the physical infrastructure. And then 3 sub-pieces of that, multi-tenancy. And multi-tenancy applies whether you're thinking of the obvious example is a hosted environment where you want to take a particular customer and they obviously need to be completely separated from all the other customers. And in multi-tenancy, the view of the world of any given user is just of the machines that he is responsible for. So it's a hierarchy, and essentially any user only sees what is below him in the hierarchy. So you get a complete view of the world that's centric around you. And as we talked about the workload policy determining how that allocation happens, and the image libraries, which allow you to pick images from a series of different libraries according to your permissions. So let's talk about the stakeholders involved here, and I'm thinking primarily from an enterprise perspective here. The IT infrastructure team, as we said, controls the provision of those resources. It maintains the physical infrastructure. It purchases additional resource as required, the capacity planning piece. It ensures the service levels are met. And it creates the virtual enterprises, these logical units, and sets the resource limits that are available. Now, just in case you think this is a complicated process, we're talking about minutes to do that. You've got the virtual enterprise administrators, the people that are responsible for each virtual side of the house. A virtual enterprise, as I said, is a logical unit. They're controlling the consumption of the resource cloud based on the resource limits that have been allocated to them. They're managing the users. And when I talk about users here, and I talk about the IT organization, a lot of this probably is all the IT organization in a large group. It's just different parts of it. So, we may be talking about the messaging group being responsible for the email enterprise. But we're separating applications from the physical hardware. And lastly, we've got the CIO, and he's the guy who wants to dictate how the workload policy works. From a perspective of what our policy is on load balancing, what our policy is on where data goes and where it's shared and all that kind of stuff. So what benefits do we get out of this? We're able to focus on, the IT organization is able to focus on the physical infrastructure and service levels, not the provisioning of individual virtual machines. We get rid of the disconnected virtual machine management because the people who are actually deploying the virtual machines are the ones who are actually using them. And moreover, they're operating within resource limits. So when those resource limits start to be reached, they're going to decommission the machines they don't need so that they can carry on deploying new machines. So you set some balance there. We've eliminated the deployment risk. Because deployment is automated, the virtual data center managers never get near a physical machine, never get near controlling a physical machine. All that's handled for you. So there's no risk to the IT infrastructure organization of that happening. Standards can be maintained from the libraries we talked about and that kind of stuff. And it then really becomes possible to do capacity planning. From the virtual data center perspective, we get a massive increase in agility. We get on-demand deployment of virtual machines literally in seconds. We can do temporary projects. We can do what-if scenarios, all that kind of stuff that's really difficult today. We get massively increased utilization. By using workload policy, we can really almost enforce our utilization. And lastly, we get the ability to do all the security and compliance stuff we talked about. So we don't introduce extra layers of risk, we reduce them. So just 3 or 4 different use cases. Who does this apply to? Sure, it applies to enterprise data centers, and that's how I've really spoken about this largely so far. But it also provides, you can do this at a small scale for right down to a development team. You can do it for hosting providers. Hosting providers can either sell virtual enterprises, if you like, and have their customers completely control those. So very easy for them to deploy. Very easy for them to pass control over that to their customers, and yet bill them either for the resources that have been allocated or for the resources that are consumed. Either model will work. Or the hosting providers can also sell resource itself, contributing to the resource cloud of another customer. So an enterprise, for example, can buy resource from a hosting provider in that elastic model we talked about. 2 different ways of hosting providers selling. And it goes right down to the SMEs as well. The same principles apply. If you don't want to have any physical machines, the whole thing still works. You just give control, and a hosting provider can give control of a virtual enterprise to an SME. They don't have to have any hardware on their site at all, but yet they can do exactly the same as anybody else could do. So let's move from talking about the vision to the Abiquo solution. And we like to think that we design the Abiquo solution in a rather different way to other vendors, perhaps. We've done this from a strategic sort of top-down design based on the vision we've talked about, rather than a tactical solution to an immediate problem, which we think is the way a lot of, validly in many cases, but a lot of the way that vendors have treated this so far. We specifically built our product to meet the user need. We didn't just say, let's make some fancy smart technology. We really thought about what is it that the users need. And again, the users in this case, we're talking about users of virtualization. We placed a very strong focus on standards and interoperability. We wanted to remain completely vendor neutral. And we wanted our product to be both open source and commercial. So the key features, and I won't labor these too much, I'd rather show you some examples. We have a complete available solution, multi-tenancy with delegated control, and the resource limits and the workload policy we've talked about. Most importantly for us, we're completely hypervisor agnostic. We don't think which hypervisor you use is the issue. You should be able to use any damn hypervisor you want. We're trying to think of a layer above that, and a hypervisor is just a commodity to us. So everything you can do on one hypervisor, you can do with another. It's the same. We've got a library of images. We've got a highly scalable architecture, which we'll see a little more about in a minute. We want to make sure that this product is practically deployable. So, for example, we can deploy against a completely live environment at any kind of speed you want to. No reboots, no reprovisioning of physical machines. You don't even have to take down the virtual machines you've already got. You can add them into the management infrastructure. A single intuitive GUI, so no matter who you are in user terms, everybody gets the same GUI, but it's tailored, it's role-based. So the GUI changes based on who you are and what you're doing. Most obviously, from anybody who logs in, you get a view of the world that's, the people below you. Standards compliant, and again, community and open source editions. We support a full range of all of the hypervisors we talked about. And he's finally getting to the subject in hand here about eliminating vendor lock-in, because in our product you can convert machine images from any hypervisor to any hypervisor. No restrictions. Any one of those, you can take an image you've got, or you've downloaded from a library or whatever, or you've taken as a snapshot image from a running machine, and you can convert it to run on any hypervisor. And I'm going to show you. So I'm going to show you a video demonstration. The demonstration goes fairly quickly because the product goes fairly quickly. We haven't cut vast amounts we've done vast amounts of editing on this. So let me tell you briefly what you're going to see, and I'll talk it through as we do it as well. We're going to manage, first of all, a Windows 7 machine. Why a Windows 7 machine? Because it's relatively small. That's the reason. I don't want you to be here waiting around. We're going to take, Windows 7 machine, minimum size is about sort of 6 gigs, something like that. We're going to open a remote session to that machine from the Abiquo console. We're going to simply open Notepad and edit a file on Notepad, and we're going to save it to the desktop. You'll see that happen. And then we're going to go back to the Abiquo console. We're going to take a stateful virtual machine image of that running machine. We're going to convert it from VMware, which is the operating system it's running under, and we're going to convert it to run on Microsoft Hyper-V. We're going to start that new image on a Hyper-V, a machine physically running Hyper-V. We're going to open the remote session, and we're going to view the Notepad file. So we're going to take exactly the machine that was running on one system, and we're going to run it on another. Okay, you ready? So here we are in the management console. We're looking at our VMware Virtual Data Center. There's our test Windows 7 machine, which is running. You can see it there running Windows 7. We're going to open a console to it. There it is. We're going to start Notepad. We're going to write some text in there. We're going to save the file. Which will appear on our desktop momentarily. There it is. Shut Notepad, shut down the session. We're going to create a stateful instance of that machine, and it's going to warn us that we're going to pause it. There we go. Do you want to create that instance, which is going to pause the machine? There we go. We're creating that instance. We've got it. Now we're going to go and take that test machine, which you'll see is now stopped, and we're going to drag it on to our testing data center, which is running Hyper-V. Okay, well, we've zoomed in so you can see the procedure that's going to go. From VMware to Hyper-V, it says, do you want to convert this image? And off we go. And as I said, it doesn't matter which two images you're converting between, it'll do all of them. It's done it. We're going to go to Hyper-V, the Hyper-V machine, and we're going to start that new machine. It's running. We're going to open up a console to it. It's just booted. There it is. There's our cloud thing on the desktop. Open it up, and we've got the machine. That is drag and drop V2V conversion. So just give you a few other little screenshots from the product. You're very welcome to come and see it on booth 107 out there. We've been delighted to see you. We've got several demonstration stations out there. We'll show you a lot more, but let me just give you a few tasting screenshots here. This is the map of our physical data centers. You can see it's just a Google map, but we can go in and zoom in and manage them. So we're thinking from the perspective here of an IT infrastructure guy managing the physical data centers. We can get statistics on what's happening in those data centers. So lots of nice graphs about utilization and all that kind of stuff going on there. And again, we're talking about not only the servers, which I've talked in a lot of terms about servers, but we're talking about external storage, we're talking about public IPs, all of that stuff. There's a management screen. Again, this is the physical infrastructure and shows us on rack number 1 in our New York data center and machine number 3. We've got 3 virtual machines there. One of them's in a paused state and 2 of them are running. I could go in and do various management tasks there. Here is the allocation of resource limits when I'm creating a new virtual enterprise. So we've got 64 gig of RAM and 200 CPU cores and 5 terabytes of hard disk allocated to this one. The soft limits, by the way, are the limits at which you'll start getting, the virtual enterprise manager will start getting warnings that he's nearing capacity. Here is an appliance that we've built by taking a bunch of, 5 in this case, virtual machines and connecting them all together and saving them as an appliance. It's a web farm. At the top, you've got a load balancer, you've got 3 Apache web servers underneath it and a MySQL database underneath that. They've been packaged together as a single unit and can be deployed as a single unit just with a simple drag-and-drop operation. So a few teasers on the product. Talking about the product architecture, again, we've built the product to be both standards compliant and we've thought about interoperability and modularity very early on as well. So each of these various different services we have around here is all modularized. So for example, if we need to add another hypervisor, that's an easy task. It's not a redesign of the product. It's very easy to add support for another hypervisor or a network service or a storage service. We've got the ability to, whenever we store down a virtual machine image, we automatically convert it to an OVF format. So internally in the product, it's all in open virtualization format that we store everything down. That's one of the reasons why that conversion we did was so quick, because everything's already in open virtualization format. On the other side, again, we use a Hibernate ORM to connect to our database. We don't want to dictate the database. It's up to you what database you want to use. We'll ship MySQL if you want to use that, but equally you can use any of the others. And then at the top layer then, also on the user API side, sure, we provide a Flex interface that you've seen, but there are maybe many other ways that you want to interface to that, either using some of the APIs that are already out there, libcloud, vcloud, those sorts of things. Some of those exist now, some of those are developing, or a direct third-party interface right into our product, because you've seen concepts there that those APIs wouldn't understand. And lastly, let's look at how you deploy this thing. Again, it's a very scalable model. We've just got one model here showing, but you can, if you want to display this at a small scale, you can take the centralized components, put them all on one machine. So, if you're talking anything up to, 100 physical machines at least, maybe many more than that, you only need a single management server to do that. If you're talking about 10,000 machines, and if you want to scale to 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 virtual machines being managed, the product will completely scale to those levels. The way that the architecture is designed, all the modules can be split up to deploy against that whole, that kind of size and scale, if that's what you want to do. So I'd like to introduce now Jordi Mas, who's the CEO of Nexica. Nexica is a hosting provider based in Spain who's been using our product quite a lot. And Jordi's going to give you his perspective for a few minutes, and then I'll come back and just wrap up briefly. Thanks, Jordi.
Thank you. Is come back? Okay.
That one's forward.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to share with you our recent experience in cloud computing. Nexica is a managed service provider focused on critical applications in a very, very customized IT services. To realize that, we need to find the best combination of infrastructure plus processes plus people. The result is an heterogeneous platform that we have. Over more than 5 years, we have been working in a service-oriented model in infrastructure as a service. As an example, we designed our own data center in a high-density model. Now we can achieve a level of increased efficiency. Here, in this slide, we can see our value proposition. Through our infrastructure as a service, plus the professional services, we have a fully managed service, except the application code. This is the rollout plan that we have been working for. We began with the requirements definitions around September 2009, and the initial vendor selection evaluation process, we considered VMware, Joyen, Eucalyptus, and Abiquo. And we have chosen Abiquo to have proven to be the most qualified for us. At this moment, we are working on the business plan, and also we are working on some customer beta test. Here you can see how the Abiquo solution matches with NextSecret requirements. The decision we took allow us to increase our efficiency in scalability, allow us also to increase our efficiency in provision and management tools, to ensure security and SLA compliancy, and maybe the most important in our environment is to continue support our heterogeneous platform. Okay. As a conclusion, the Abiquo solutions meets our business and technical requirements. Together, we can share a clear and shared strategy and solution roadmap. For us, the most important is that eliminates the vendor lock-in. And now we can see Abiquo as a partner more than a software supplier. Thank you.
Thanks. So just a couple more slides to wrap up. In conclusion, we talked a lot about the vision. Remember the pieces around the vision we talked about, the three principles: separation, delegation, allocation. It doesn't quite go together. I suppose SAD, but that's not very good, is it? No. The subplots, multi-tenancy, workload policy, and image libraries, and together they give us what we call the resource cloud. And that's a completely vendor-neutral thing we're proposing here. Secondly, if we look at the conclusion on the product itself, we have shown you a solution which we believe resolves the IT infrastructure overload problem by delegating control to teams of people that are connected with the application, not running it by people that are disconnected from the application, which we think is a lot of the problems. We've resolved the issues of management sprawl because we've now spread out the management amongst people who, first of all, amongst many more people, and secondly, amongst people who are actually connected, as we've said. We've eliminated the provisioning effort. The provisioning of a new machine is even easier than when I showed you the drag-and-drop conversion. It's even easier than that. So we've returned agility back to the organization. We can do what-if scenarios. We can do short-term projects, all that kind of stuff. We've improved utilization, and we've enabled capacity planning. And most of all, based on what we've been talking about, we've eliminated vendor lock-in. So I'm proud to be able to wear my new badge, which looks like that. So I'll put it on there. You can come and get yours, booth 107. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete Malcolm. Abiquo or Abiquo? That's my only question. Abiquo or Abiquo or both?
Well, in Spain they say more
He says
Abiquo.
He says Abiquo.